Hello, I'm Paul Peterson. Whether starting a family, buying a home, or investing in a retirement plan, most of us have at some time or another recognized the value of planning for the future. But when it comes to caring for an aging loved one, not so many of us have planned for the responsibilities that this can entail. Joining us today for the first in a quarterly series discussing caregiving topics are Department of Aging Family Caregiver Specialist Dr. Anat Lewis and Susie Rodriguez-Shapiro. We'll be discussing hoarding behavior, which, although a joke to some, can put the hoarder and their neighbors at risk from fire hazards, unsanitary conditions, and even the very real possibility of being buried under an avalanche of junk. It's happened. Stay tuned for Aging in LA. They say one man's trash is another man's treasure. But what do you do when someone's excessive collection of clutter makes their home a health hazard and a danger for not only themselves, but their neighbors too? Today our guests are two Department of Aging Family Caregiver Specialists, Dr. Anat Lewis and Susie Rodriguez-Shapiro. They are going to help us to understand and help those people we know who may have problems with hoarding. Welcome to you both. Now, this is a topic that people sometimes snicker and laugh, but it really does affect quite a number of seniors. Right, Doctor?
Yes, it does. A majority are seniors.
Mm-hmm. And what is it, just an inability to throw stuff away, or is there a psychological component here?
Yeah, there is a term for it. It's obsessive compulsive disorder.
OCD, right? Okay.
And what we see with hoarding is it's excessive collection of objects. Sometimes it's excessive collection of animals. Mm-hmm. But it's to a degree where it becomes unsafe and unhealthy. And it affects their day-to-day living, where it affects their home, it affects their health, it affects their socializing. They tend to be very ashamed and embarrassed to have people come over to their house.
Sure, and then the isolation begins and deepens on and on. But Susie, how are caregivers supposed to deal with this? Because often we're the only people who may stop into that apartment and see that you can't get around in it.
That can be very concerning for family members when they come by to visit and see that someone is living in what might be considered squalor because it's so messy. But the important thing is that they not become judgmental and harsh and sarcastic in their comments about it, but that they more explore the safety aspects of it. Mm-hmm. And try to work with the person to see how they can improve the situation so that it's not such a hazard.
Well, many times the person that we're talking about considers this clutter treasures. Maybe they have things of great importance to them within the mess.
You know, one of the distinctions is if we look at the comparison between a collector versus a hoarder. Mm-hmm. You know, collectors do take pride in what they collect, and they want to share it. They want to show you what their newest piece is. Someone who's hoarding and just aggregating things isn't so excited about other people seeing things. They try to avoid people coming to their homes. They try to avoid it all. So there's a big distinction between collecting and hoarding.
And as a person gets older, correct me if I'm wrong here, it gets harder to clean up. You know, there was a time in my life when you sort of roll up your sleeves and said, okay, I'm cleaning the house today. But you get into your 60s and 70s, you don't have that energy level anymore.
You're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. It does get overwhelming. They're tired. If they have a medical condition, it gets harder, you know, whether it means bending down or lifting things. And that's why part of the hoarding also begins that way, because of a medical condition.
Right. Now, we have so many seniors who are living alone. They don't have family, or if they do have family, that family is not paying attention and they don't drop in often enough. What kind of help is available for a person who maybe is watching us today and saying, gee, I would like to get some help cleaning this place up. Is there help available?
Well, through the Department of Aging, we have different agencies that we could refer to, different organizing companies who could come out and help you organize. But ultimately, it's up to the family member or the hoarder to first divide up what it is they want to keep, what's truly valuable to them, versus what they aren't using anymore or isn't functional anymore. A lot of hoarders, what they do is keep appliances that aren't working.
Yes. You might as well be talking about me. I confess.
But, you know, if you set it aside, put it in the garage versus laying out in the pathway in the stairway, blocking doorways to the bathroom, and just, you know, whether it's clothes or old magazines that they like to keep. But over time, what happens, it builds up, and then it becomes a fire hazard, a safety hazard. And that's our concern.
Right, and in terms of safety hazard, I know so many times first responders will report that they've come into a cluttered home or apartment and the person has fallen over their own junk. Now, we'll be giving out a telephone number later, so people, you want to get pencil and paper if they have this particular problem. But when a caregiver notices this sort of behavior, is it a good idea to have like a referee come in, someone to help first instruct the caregiver so they give the best possible help, Susie?
Well, one of the good things is that because we are available to help them through the Department of Aging, if they call us, we can do family caregiving consults to try and get that family caregiver to understand what are the successful ways to make an intervention and the unsuccessful ways. Again, embarrassing somebody, shaming them, scolding them, if you will, that is not going to get us anywhere. But if they contact us and we work with them on how to work through this, we can help them determine, is this actually a mental health issue that requires that kind of attention? Is it a matter of just some conversation that has to take place to help figure out, okay, what is it that we can toss out because it is basically rubbish? What is it that we want to keep for sentimental reasons? And what is it that maybe we can give away to someone else who might need it? Sorting through that and explaining and bringing in the older adult who is doing the hoarding can make them a part of the solution instead of them just feeling bad about the situation.
And I think it's so important for people to remember, you are not alone. So many families over the years, the decades, have gone through this, and the Department of Aging has specialists for you. There's genuine help available. Now, just so you get an idea of what we're talking about, we have some footage provided by Los Angeles County that shows pretty vividly the extreme results of hoarding. The woman who lived in this house got most of her meals from dumpsters behind supermarkets and fast food outlets. Her son had tried to help her, but unfortunately he passed away. Rat and mouse droppings were plentiful throughout the home, as well as colonies of cockroaches. Now here, Doctor, this is sort of typical of what you would see.
This is very typical, and what you see is over time they can't throw away old, used food items. It just clutters. You'll see clothing, just piles and piles of stuff. We'll see right here where you can't tell what this is, but it's actually a bathroom.
Look at that, and no access.
Right, no access, and you can't use it anymore. So it's rooms that can't be used the way they were supposed to, and it just becomes a collection building up, and you see how unsafe it is.
Yes.
The person is getting up in the middle of the night, trying to go to the restroom, they're going to trample over, they're going to fall over, hurt themselves.
Sure. Wow. Wow, and there are genuine health risks involved here.
Absolutely.
I mean, living in unsanitary conditions like this, and makes you kind of think, what if they're taking that 5-year-old bottled water and drinking that? Oh my goodness.
Right.
Now, in that particular case, I noticed there were a lot of cans and just stuff that I guess at one time or another, you just toss that in the trash and then take the trash out. But these people have somehow lost that ability to throw things away.
Right, and that's one of the earmarks of hoarding, is where people assess more value to something than it really has.
Right.
It's an emotional attachment, and the thought of even eliminating these things can become very anxiety focused for them. So that's where we have to help them.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting when you said the difference between collecting stuff, you know, which might be newspaper clippings that build up over time, and just an inability to throw things that at another time in your life you knew were worthless, that they don't need to stay in your home. Can a person, a caregiver, make a call for intervention that this is so obvious that a mental health issue has presented itself? Is that something that you don't call 911, but you can call the Department of Aging,
You
right?
can call Department of Aging, and I guess what we will do is assess the situation. Sometimes we do call in Adult Protective Services, and it's not only for abuse, but it's also for self-neglect.
Okay.
So we evaluate that. We also call in Department of Mental Health to make an evaluation. Is this a medical condition, or is this more of a mental health condition where the person is no longer capable of caring for themselves? They're no longer able to take their medication right, no longer able to take good care of their hygiene, and just from the picture that we saw shows you that this person has moved on. It's not the clutter, it's not a collector, but it's more this inability to let go of things that you can't use anymore. It's garbage.
And, I wonder if some of the reluctance of caregivers comes from their own personal sense of failure, that I let mom down, or my dear aunt isn't getting the kind of care that, and they're going to come after me.
Right. And it can be obviously very overwhelming to the caregiver to think, where do we even begin with this? And again, the Department of Public Health gets involved, because at some point some of this rubbish goes beyond the four walls of the house.
Yes.
And it starts to filter out into the yards, the porches, and things of that sort. So when the Department of Public Health steps in, on occasion they've had to demolish things because there becomes so much mold and mildew, structural damage, infestation, that some places have had to be demolished.
Wow.
So it can be very overwhelming, and it creeps up on you.
Well, of course, especially if you're an infrequent visitor. I wonder sometimes if the best advice isn't to say to a family, look, let's pick a Saturday here, and we are all going to get together and work as an army and see if we just can't take care of this.
Right. But it doesn't happen that easily. Some family members, they say, well, we'll send mom on a vacation. We'll all come in, like you're saying, and we'll just bring the garbage bags and fill it all up. The key here is you have to include the hoarder in this team. It's a teamwork effort. So it's not only the family, the hoarder also has to be involved in the decision making. Because if they are not bought in, guess what's going to happen? You're going to come in the next week and the hoarding is going to continue.
Wow.
Okay? So there's a high recidivism, relapse, where when the person comes back in and sees everything is nice and clean from our perspective, whether it's the professional or the family member, they don't see that. They see that you took away their belongings, things that they loved, they cared for. So we have to be very careful how we approach this. The key is it's more of an interdisciplinary team where the key player is the hoarder, and see where they're coming from. What were the triggers that resulted in them collecting all this stuff?
Right.
Because if we change the environment, doesn't mean you're going to change the behavior. And that's something to remember.
Well, we see this in all sorts of addictive behaviors, that the rationalizations can often be really quite remarkable, and from that person's perspective makes complete sense. Well, there's value in those old aluminum cans that I feed my cat with. Now, how about things like, what if they have pets and they need more care? Can you help with that as well?
Well, there is such a thing as hoarding of animals, where people and so much of this, I think, comes from the goodness of someone's heart, actually, where they want to take in what they think is a stray pet and bring them in, but before you know it, they've exceeded the limits that the Humane Society says we can have in our homes.
I apologize for breaking in, but it's time for a short break. When we return, we will continue our discussion of Caregiving 101 on hoarding. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Remember, pets need to prepare for disasters too. Put together an emergency kit with water, a water bowl, food, and any medications they may need. Get the message. Be prepared.
The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power wants to give you up to 7 free shade trees just for completing a workshop, either online or in your neighborhood. The Trees for a Green LA program offers LADWP residents over 40 different varieties of free shade trees. Trees benefit the environment, save energy, and add beauty. Get your trees by participating in an online workshop by logging on to ladwp.com/trees or call 1-800-GREEN-LA.
Welcome back to Aging in LA. Our topic on today's program is Caregiver 101 on hoarding. Our guests are family caregiver specialists from the Los Angeles Department of Aging, Dr. Anat Lewis and Susie Rodriguez-Shapiro. You know, I just had a thought here during the break. This isn't really just about your economic conditions. This isn't like living in the slums. This can be a very upscale person who has amassed possessions they can't clean.
Absolutely. I've been to homes of very well-off people, educated people, so it hits all levels of socioeconomic status. The thing to remember, and Susie began touching on this, is in terms of the dirt related to the hoarding, what it causes is health issues.
Right.
You have high incidence of asthma, respiratory condition, contagious diseases because of feces and dirt laying around from animals, from animal hoarding.
Right.
You have safety issues related to fire hazards because building up newspapers and old clothing laying around, higher risks of falls. And we already know as a person gets older, you're already increasing your risk of fall.
Right, and that's a big determinant in whether you can have a healthy aging.
Right.
That's
As well as the social aspects. Social isolation, they're more ashamed to bring people around the house. They isolate themselves, they're by themselves. And it's very sad and depressing. So they're lonelier.
I was amazed to read that often couples are involved in this hoarding behavior, that elderly parents, perhaps, your aunt and uncle, together have amassed this clutter.
I think what happens there is that usually one of them is worse than the other, and the other is what we would call in today's psychology an enabler.
Right.
They don't want to start trouble. They don't want to create problems with their spouse, so they just go along with it. And as we were saying, much of this sometimes does come from a good place in their heart, where they think, I don't need this now, but I may need it later. Someone I know may need it later. This may help out, so it's on sale, so I should get it now. So there are different levels and different types of hoarding that can happen. And it generally comes from someone who wants to do good for someone else, but it's way out of control.
Of course, I'm thinking of the house with many rooms where one room is kind of reserved for junk, but boy, if that starts to spill out through the house, then...
And that's typically what happens. It usually starts in one area of the house and then slowly starts creeping in throughout the rest of the
Then I
house.
better have a tune-up. I was amazed. My wife and I inherited her mother's house, and in order to move in, to make room for our 30 years of stuff, we had to move 60 years of stuff. And this was a clean house. I'm not talking clutter, but I'm talking 30 years of accumulations. Sometimes I know for a fact in my neighborhood people have gone from a larger house to a smaller house, and there is no room.
Right.
And they won't sell a stick of furniture.
And typically with hoarding, it doesn't happen overnight.
Yes.
It is over time. And you'll see it more as a young adult, start collecting things. Like Susie was saying, they keep it for a present, give away to someone, but then as the person gets older and then you walk into their house, these are things they have collected over the years.
Yes.
The garage is now full, so now they have to bring it in the house.
Of course. But I'm just thinking, you can see it happening. Well, I saved these aluminum cans because the nephews come over and they take it to the recycling center. And then the nephews are in their late 20s or 30s and don't come by anymore, and the next thing you know, they're still saving the cans, and there they sit piling
And the
up.
intention to do something with these things is what starts to cause storage in inappropriate places.
Yes.
So pretty soon you're putting things in corners of rooms. Pretty soon you're putting them in the bathtub. Pretty soon you're putting them inside the oven because you're not using the oven.
Right.
On top of the stove. And before you know it, the rooms are not really available for what they're expected to be used. I've seen homes where you go into the person's bedroom, and the bed itself already has so much that all you see is a little space where the person kind of crawls in and out of at night and in the morning, because the bed is full of things, because the bedroom is now full of things. So it just inches.
Okay. Well, Bobby, friend of mine, Bobby Sherman, said sometimes he will get into these crowded rooms, but there will always be a clear path to the television set. Somehow or another, that one easy chair and that remains open. Well, are there professional services that do this stuff in addition to the nonprofits who maybe are accustomed to dealing with the mental part of this? But a professional service that you could call on to say, hey, I've got this place, it needs to be cleaned up.
Typically it starts, if we're dealing with an older adult, it's a social worker or case manager through the senior center, because the family member has access to them because they're getting some meals, they're getting some other services. So that's usually the first point of contact. And then it's assessing and seeing what the older adult, what do they want? Are they actually asking for help? Or is this older adult not capable anymore because of the limitations that they have that we were discussing before? And that's when we bring in whether it's Adult Protective Services, so they could assess and do a write-up. Do we need to bring in other family members to see, is this person no longer safe to live at their home? Do they need to be placed somewhere else? And that's usually where we start.
Right. I would think this is kind of a special obligation just as a human being. If you're a landlord and one of your tenants is in this condition, maybe it's a long-term tenant, you can call the department, right, and say, listen, I'm this person's landlord and I'm growing concerned.
Right. And that's the piece that, even as we said, there's many older adults that don't have family members at all or nearby, so they may not be aware of it. But as a neighbor, if you start to see that last time you went over to check in on someone, you saw evidence of what you think is progressing to become worse, or a landlord, certainly give a call, let us know what you've observed, and then we'll look into it and see whether it's a problem.
Well, now, obviously, you have to worry about any kind of threatening behavior because people will shut themselves off. How is that approached if you're going cold to someone's home and saying, I'm just checking on you? Is that kind of what you do?
Typically, that's what we do. We want to establish the rapport. We want them to feel safe. We're not here to take things away, take them out of their home, because, everyone in their home is their place of comfort.
It's their castle.
So, and typically what you see with hoarders, they do not let you in right off the bat. It takes a long time to establish that rapport, to let their guard down, to make them feel safe that we're here for them.
Is it a sense of privacy, or is there some residual shame?
Yeah, there's shame. There's the embarrassment. And it's also the fear that we're going to take their stuff away. Because like we were saying, for them it's value. They don't see it the way we see it. So what we need to do is educate them and explain to them that this is in relation to safety and for their health. Those people who hoard animals, they typically are rescuers, right?
Yes.
So they do it out of the love of their heart. They don't want these animals to go wandering around, not have food. But what happens with hoarding animals is they build up so many animals, there isn't enough space. The animals have all these conditions that they become contagious, and one gives it to the other.
Right,
they can't get the vaccinations, the sanitation. So the purpose of why they were trying to rescue the animal is now why we have to come and help them with the animal. And these animals, we end up having to, put them to sleep because they become so ill that it's even out of the vet's control to know how to take care of them.
But do you find that the hoarder responds to this kind? I mean, that's a wonderful approach. It gets them to buy into the issues. But when you explain safety issues to them, or the malnourished excess of pets they have, are they still able to comprehend that?
Generally, when it's approached as a concern, people do. And what I have found interesting is that as we've gone around the communities of Los Angeles to talk on this topic, afterwards people have come over still kind of hanging their head down a little and saying, I think I might have this problem. How can I get help? So they do,
Wonderful.
self-identify.
Wow.
But when they understand that it's about helping them to resolve something that they know underlying is a problem rather than a threat, they are much more open to getting help.
Well, that makes great sense. I just think over and over, this happens so often to people in isolation. And we've got to, if we have elderly neighbors, we've got to look in on them. We just have to do that.
Right. But it's a very complex issue.
Sure.
Again, it's not something that could be solved within a week or within a month's time. The key is to establish a goal with the hoarder. See, if we help you with starting with one room, with one section
Right.
at a time, rather than
Makes sense.
let's clean up the whole place,
Yeah.
that's going to overwhelm them.
Sure.
And like I said, recidivism is very high. So they will relapse and start collecting again. So you got to accept them where they're at and start there. There's also a clutter support group or a hoarder support group that are out in the community where they could be with others who understand them, accept them, and they feel very safe in that kind of setting.
That's wonderful. So look, help is available. Now, our time is up for today's program. Thanks so much to our guests, Dr. Annette Lewis and Susie Rodriguez Shapiro from our own Los Angeles City Department of Aging. And now, it's time for today's Senior Stat Shots. Since we discussed how caregivers can deal with hoarding on today's program, we are going to share some statistics on how many seniors require some form of assistance with personal care. A recent study by the California Department of Aging estimated that 30% of women and 17% of men over the age of 75 need some form of assistance. The study went on to show that in the age group 65 to 79, 17% of men and women need some kind of assistance. In the age group 75 to 84, 28% require some form of assistance. Those men and women 85 and older, nearly half, 49%, need some form of personal care assistance. By the way, the age group 85 and older is the fastest growing segment of the U.S. population. And that's today's Senior Stat Shot. The Los Angeles Department of Aging produces this program with CityView, Channel 35, so that seniors living in Los Angeles and surrounding communities are well informed on the many issues that face them in everyday life. And also we'll let you know of the many services that the Department of Aging offers our senior citizens. Now, we'd like to hear from you with comments on the program, what you like, what you think can be improved, and your ideas for future programs will be welcome. Please give us a call. The number's right there on your screen, 213-252-4088. That's 213-252-4088. Call us with your comments and ideas. We look forward to hearing from you. I'm Paul Peterson for the Los Angeles Department of Aging, the people here at CityView Channel 35, and all of our guests on Aging in LA. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.